Before I say anything, I would just like to say that I'm very honored to be here. This is my first conference where I'm presenting as a speaker. So if anything is not to your liking, please don't grill me too hard. I would like to start with talking about the US stimulus measures. I'm sure anyone who has turned on the TV and paid attention to American politics in the past year or so would have heard something about the stimulus checks or Biden's unemployment benefits, and maybe someone who was more perceiving might have even heard about the rent moratoriums that took place in the United States. And what I focused my paper on was to see if any of these policies, in fact, did or did not have an effect on the increased unemployment that we did see throughout Q1, Q2, and Q3 of this year, despite the fact that there were certain epidemiological improvements. So, talking about unemployment, can look at several different types of unemployment. Of course, there's the frictional unemployment, which everyone who just comes out of college faces when they're looking for their new job. There's structural unemployment, which is a result of severe skill mismatch and something that we might be facing in the near future. And what I would like to talk today about is institutional unemployment. And institutional unemployment is a concept that was pioneered by classical and Austrian economists. And the entire premise of institutional unemployment is that unemployment can be caused when powerful institutions set rules in such a way where the labor market cannot reach equilibrium. So to give an example, let's say that an employer and an employee make a deal where the employer will pay the employee an X amount in wages, but then the government imposes a new minimum wage law, or the employee joins a labor union, and now the new wages that need to be paid are Y, where Y is greater than X. If the employer cannot pay the paid sum and the worker then ends up unemployed, we would call that institutional unemployment. As Ludwig von Mises said, it is not the outcome of the decisions of individual job seekers, it is the effect of interference with the market phenomena intent upon enforcing by coercion and compulsion wage rates higher than those the unhampered market would have determined. So a key source, a key idea when talking about institutional unemployment is the idea of price floors. So as I just said, it's this notion that the government or another institution creates conditions under which a certain good or service, in this case labor, cannot be bought for a low under a certain price. And this concept will be very important in illustrating how unemployment was caused by the stimulus. But before we get into that, why exactly are we talking about unemployment in the US? So in the late spring and early summer of 2021, there were substantial improvements in the US epidemiological situation in regards to COVID-19. Cases were going down, more and more people were getting vaccinated. Of course, it wasn't optimal, but it was much better than it was before. So it seemed as though employment rates were on their way to return to normality. However, they remained at an all-time high of 5%. Well, not an all-time high, but stubbornly high. And what was more shocking in relation to this was that despite the unemployment being higher than it was before the pandemic, employers were becoming more and more competitive for workers. So there was the somewhat medialized example of a McDonald's chain in Florida, which was willing to pay people $50 just to turn up to an interview. And this sort of trend was underlined by a study by the American National Federation of Independent Business in March 2021, which found that 42% of small business owners said that they had job openings they could not fill. So what's up with that? The unemployment rates are higher than they were before the pandemic. The epidemiological situation was improving, yet businesses could not find workers. People were not coming back to work. And I believe that the stimulus that was so generously provided by the US government was to blame, and can justify that just by looking at the sum of money that was handed out by the US government. So among these measures were free stimulus checks: $1,200 in April 2020, $600 in December 2020 and January 2021, $1,400 in March 2021, a rent moratorium that started in September 2020 and was intended to last for 3 months, but ended up lasting in some states until August 2021, until the Supreme Court of the United States ended the moratorium. Added to that, there was generous fiscal assistance granted to those who were unemployed, with $300 a week being granted, with that being a total of $1,200 a month. So, looking at all these policies, how much could a household extract from these policies? Well, if we look at a median American family of 4, they spend somewhere between $629 to $1,507 on rent, depending on state. That means that the 10 months of the rent moratorium that was granted by the US government would have allowed them to save somewhere between $6,290 to $15,070. Moving on, Americans also benefited from the free separate stimulus checks, which added up to $3,200, and with the unemployment benefits of $300 per week over this 10-month period, would have been $12,000 per adult, or $24,000 for a family with 2 parents capable of working. Taking all these factors into account, an American family of 4 would have benefited from $33,490 to $42,270 worth of benefits. To put this into context, a median American household in 2019 made $68,703. That means in 10 months, such a household would make $57,252, which means that the sum of money granted by the US government to households would have covered 58.5 to 73.8% of their income. While this sum of money is nothing that someone would get rich by, it certainly offered a great deal of comfort and subsistence to certain households, which could go a great way towards explaining why, despite an improvement in conditions, the United States continued to suffer from higher unemployment rates. So now we can return to price floors. Normally, when we talk about price floors, they're usually seen as something hard and fixed, as a law or a result of a labor union strike, something that can't be moved. I think in this case, the relief that was given by the US government to its citizens provided not this sort of hard price floor, but a sort of soft price floor, where employees essentially had to choose between working for their subsistence or being unemployed for their subsistence, especially with the rent moratorium applying to a certain income group and the unemployment benefits obviously being only for the unemployed. This means that the US government by this policy, in effect, created an unemployment trap where people had to choose between working or living at a slight sacrifice, but without working. These soft price floors could also be compared to other stimulatory policies, such as a universal basic income. That is something that a lot of people have been talking about in relation to these policies as something that might be implemented on a long run. A universal basic income is a policy in which all designated beneficiaries, usually citizens or residents, are set to receive a fixed annual or monthly income regardless of their employment or social status. Crudely said, it is free money for everyone. What would distinguish a policy like that from what we saw during the coronavirus over the 10 months is that this would be something more permanent rather than an emergency measure. But as we can see from the unemployment that has arisen throughout the pandemic, such a policy would likely further disincentivize work. As Mises said, there were and still are people who work only for some time and then live for another period from the savings they have accumulated by working. The average man there is so callous and inert that he knows of no other use for his earnings than to buy some leisure time. He works only to remain unemployed for some time. Before I end, I would like to add a note that there has been, in discussion of this unemployment, some people, usually on the left, have voiced that it is a good thing, that given that corporations have more than enough money to spend, according to them, it is a good thing that they are now being forced to compete more and more for workers. I couldn't disagree more, because in our world, which is becoming increasingly more and more digitalized and automated, a policy that makes unskilled labor, such as that sought after by the McDonald's in Florida, more expensive, will only incentivize corporations more and more to digitalize, and thus a policy which at first creates institutional unemployment could very well create structural unemployment, where companies digitalize faster than their ex-employees can reskill. So, in conclusion, assessing the policy in its totality, we can conclude that the stimulus and other relief-related policies employed by the U.S. government have harmed employment within the United States. Furthermore, we can deduce that these policies have been been implemented for a longer period with intentions of surpassing mere crisis relief, they would have likely yielded the same long-term results, with employment rates suffering while the government subsidizes unproductive activity. Lastly, the relevance of the Austrian School of Economics when examining this issue remains as a testament to the relevancy and everlasting nature of the observations made by the founders of this economic school. Thank you very much.
Are there any questions? If not immediately, I actually have just something to add and run by you. I was thinking about during your talk. We talk about how corporations have plenty of money, but yet in the United States, at least as you were talking about, there were bailouts for consumers, for taxpayers, but these were dwarfed by magnitudes by the amount of money given to corporations. So how do you think that the money given to corporations affected those corporations actively seeking to hire or being incentivized by what would usually be a free market into going after workers harder, offering better benefits in order to get them off the couches and back into their place of business?
Well, I think when we bail out companies, the usual idea behind it is to prevent mass unemployment. However, as some speakers have already brought up, mentioned at this conference, this can lead to a problem of zombie companies that rely on government stimulus. And if these companies purely rely on government benefits and subsidies to sort of prop up their slim, if at all existent, profit margins, then I don't think they would have many qualms about spending that money aggressive when competing for employees, similarly to how bureaucrats have no notion of limits to spending.
Any other questions? No? All right, well then, thank you very much, Maximilian.
Thank you. Thank you.